Hi, I'm Kristy Knichel, co-host of the LLC podcast. It's an honor to introduce listeners to inspiring women who are making a real difference in the logistics and supply chain. With the LLC podcast, you'll hear inspirational stories, both personal and professional challenges our guests have overcame, how their backgrounds help to shape who they are today, and how they empower others, give back to their communities and often the world. Joining me today is Dr. Rita Webster. She is the founder of WiseLeader. Rita works with leaders who want to get to their next level of contribution. She founded WiseLeader over 20 years ago and has made a difference in the professional lives of countless leaders and their teams. Rita currently does one-on-one coaching, runs roundtables for VP and director level women leading change, teaches the mid-level women manager leadership cohort series, and does systematic team coaching with teams who want to make better decisions and work more effectively with all of their stakeholders. Rita lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, near the Mississippi River. She is an avid flower and vegetable gardener, and she has two adult children and two young granddaughters who she adores and gets to spend a lot of time with. Thanks for being here. Let's dive right in.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me, Kristy. I'm excited about our conversation.
Absolutely. So, can you please share with our listeners a little bit more about where you grew up, your education, and any early influences or mentors you may have had along the way?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I grew up on a dairy farm in a little community in Wisconsin called Ellsworth. And the family farm has actually been in the Webster name for over 100 years.
Wow.
Yeah, kind of amazing. And so my nephew right now is remodeling the house where I grew up so that he can continue milking cows in the same barn where my dad milked cows and I help my dad milk cows. So it's pretty amazing. And I'm the second of eight children, grew up with a strong work ethic, and I was the quiet, smart kid going all through school. And I was thinking back to when I was in college, I had a speech class and I had to stand up and give a speech. I shook so hard I could hardly read my notes. And when I sat down, my friend said, I thought you were going to cry. Your voice was so shaky. So it's really pretty amazing that I'm doing speaking for a living now and having a great time doing it. So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah. So I had got a PhD from the University of Minnesota almost 25 years ago now, and I was really interested in how do we get stuff out of three-ring training binders and actually into people's behavior. And that's when the research on coaching was just coming out to say coaching was a process that really helped with that. So that's really how I got started. And if I think back to an early mentor, I would say my great aunt Gert would be the person because she always had this twinkle in her eye. And when she connected with you, you felt like you were the only person in her world.
Oh, that is an awesome story. So, speaking of that, I mean, did you envision that you would be working so closely with women, though, and helping them navigate through their careers and different challenges? And, what made you decide to take this career path?
Yeah, that's so interesting. And my answer to that would be no, I didn't anticipate that. And in fact, I sort of kept it at arm's length for quite a long time because I was coaching men and women, which I still do. But what happened was when I was coaching women executives, they often would just lean into the conversation and say, does anyone else think like me? Does anyone else have these kinds of challenges? And I thought, oh my gosh, I hear the common themes, but they don't hear the common themes from each other. And oftentimes, the things that they were kind of struggling with or wondering if anybody else was thinking about those things, those were exactly the things that they needed to be bringing forward in their organizations in order to make change. And so Mark LeBlanc was my business coach at the time. And for a couple of years or more, he'd always say to me, Rita, you should be focusing on women leaders. And I'd be like, no, that's too narrow of a focus. And then he had a seminar, and there were a group of us business owners that were there. And we, as part of it, we stood up and talked about what we were really passionate about doing. And people in that room went, "You should be working with women leaders. Your face totally lights up when you talk about them." So at that point, I'm like, okay, and have been focusing on women leaders ever since. And I'm having more fun now than I did even when I started 20 some years ago.
Now that's so awesome because we talk about now how there's more and more women coming into the workforce and moving up the ladder. But even back then, when you started, I could imagine there probably wasn't many at all. So probably why you didn't want to focus maybe just on women. Not thinking that like, hey, are more women going to be coming into these roles?
Yeah, and I could see the reasons why women needed to move up and why we needed to have women at the top. But I would talk with executives, this was 20 some years ago now, remember, and they were sort of like, yeah, it was a nice to have for them. And now they're reaching out to me saying, what can you do and what do you have? We want to get women moved up in our organization even faster. So there's been a huge shift in the marketplace.
No, that's awesome. I think we've been seeing that over the last several years, or maybe even longer than that. But I feel like more specifically in my industry over the last, several years. So, and obviously, I'm very familiar with you and what you do because you do work with our team here. But please tell our listeners more about Wise Leader and why helping women is your passion. Why do you feel it's so important to help women with coaching and training, and why it's important for women to reach out for support from someone like yourself?
Yeah, those are great questions. So I feel passionate about it because I know we need more women at the top of our organizations. We need our point of view. And in general, we need more diverse voices. And our organizations are really starting to understand that point because our customer bases are becoming so very, very, very diverse. And now the research is showing that organizations that have more than the token woman on their board of directors, in their executive teams, at the executive levels in their organizations, all their numbers are better than organizations that don't. So that's a pretty strong reinforcement for why we need our ideas and our voices at the top. And I think the other reason that women really need the support is so often the skills and the perspectives that we have that our organizations really need, they're not modeled everywhere in our organizations. So by having a coach or being in a training program with other women, you can share and realize you're not alone and build that sense of confidence and those skill sets in order to bring those ideas forward in a new kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, it's awesome you bring that up because I feel like even in my own company, we find that there's certain roles too that women excel in maybe more than some men. Not that men can't do that role, but there's just certain tasks that are different. Men and women think differently sometimes about things. So when you talk about being diverse, bringing different opinions to the table and talking about those, and it really at the end of the day, who's better for that position? But a woman could be just as good for that position as a man.
Yeah, and we need all the perspectives. I've always said this isn't about man bashing or anything like that. It's really about the fact that organizations were set up from the male perspective way back when, just because there weren't as many women in the workforce. And so if we would have been setting up the organizations, we'd have done it probably way differently than they were originally set up. And now we're having to move in a different direction and make those changes. So all the more reason for our voices to be able to be strong and to be able to bring our voices forward and have the support for doing that in a way that it makes our ideas easy to be heard and implemented.
Absolutely. No, really great points. So, we hear a lot about how important emotional intelligence is. What does that mean, and why is it important that everybody understands how that can affect them personally and professionally?
Yeah, that's another great question. And from my own experience for years, there's been research coming out about emotional intelligence, but it's really been fairly heady. And so I stumbled upon the work of Dr. Mark Brackett, who is the executive director for the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And he has taken a very personal kind of an approach to emotional intelligence. And I have all my clients download the Mood Meter app that was developed by Dr. Brackett. And it's so hands-on, and it really helps expand our emotional vocabularies. And why it's so important to us now is because the new leadership that we need in this world of complexity and constant change really involves leaders being able to understand and manage their own emotions, as well as understanding and managing the emotions of the people that we have on our teams, of our colleagues, of our bosses. And so also understanding that our emotions are with us. It's part of being human, and we can't leave them at the door anymore when we're in our organizations. And then one of the things that I teach my clients, and especially women that are in the mid-level women managers cohort programs, is that our emotions are simply data, and it's like a river that's running through us all the time. And when we can figure out how to take that data and use it, it can be a wonderful tool for helping direct us in terms of actions that we need to be taking to take good care of ourselves, or just really understanding how to regulate our emotions. Because with the constant change that most of our organizations are experiencing, the level of fear and frustration goes way up. And if you don't know how to navigate that terrain from an emotional intelligence standpoint, that fear and frustration can be a real showstopper in terms of trying to get change initiatives moving forward. And I had a really great example of this a couple of years ago. I was coaching a woman. She was director level in her organization. They were trying to make some incredible major changes that would make the organization more effective, provide better services for their customers. And she had a team that had new people, but there were some people who had been with the organization for a long time, and they were resisting the change. They were just kind of like, yeah, no. And so she came to some of our calls really struggling and saying, I don't know what to do to get them to kind of move. And so we talked about the fact that they probably were afraid, they're probably frustrated because things are going to change. And so she figured out some strategies and ways that she could actually sit down and talk with them about, what are you afraid of? What are you really frustrated with? And then she could counter those fears. She could listen, and they felt like they were heard. And then she could counter those fears with what the new programming was actually going to be able to offer. She came back to the call. She said, I met with each of those women twice, and she came back to our coaching call and said, it was just like that resistance evaporated. She was shocked at how quickly that could make that change, because she could see and understand the emotions that they were feeling. She could create a safe space where they could share those emotions so they felt heard. And as we know, when emotions are felt, heard, and acknowledged, then they can dissipate rather than ramping up, because we also know if we shove those emotions down, they got to go somewhere. And so they either show up as resistance, or they show up in big ways that are inappropriate, or they sap our energy and we start to feel depressed because those emotions are just clogging everything up. So it's one of the most important skill sets for any leader that's got major change going on in their organizations. And I think that's most organizations these days.
It absolutely is, including mine. So we're going through some of those tough times ourselves. So I definitely hear exactly what you're saying. And I mentor too, and I I had one of our carriers reach out to me because he was dealing with the same issue. He had a management change, and the older people didn't want to change with the new person in charge, and the new people were on board. And like, me telling him the same thing, you got to get out there, you got to ask them questions, you got to listen to them. And at the end of the day, they just want to be heard. I know that's just one piece of it, but that's a big piece of it, knowing that you're acknowledging it. And
Yes.
everybody's different too, right? Like everyone has different styles, different ways that they receive information or give information, or hear information.
Yeah.
So knowing that too, that not everybody's the same and
Yeah.
can't expect the same results in dealing with everybody the same way too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And really having that sense of empathy, being able to kind of put yourself in those other people's shoes to think about what might they be afraid of. And then being able to, like you were sharing, Kristy, creating that sense of safe space. There's a word for it now called psychological safety. But back 20 years ago, when I was doing my dissertation on a leadership cohort program, that was one of the things that I discovered that made those programs so valuable, because the leaders learned how to create this sense of safe space. And we didn't have the term psychological safety back then, which we do now, but it's so vital. And learning how to do that as a leader can help your organization in ways more than I can even count.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. So let's talk a little bit about leadership. So, as women leaders, there are many challenges that we face, to name a few. We have work life balance, the importance of self care, saying no, delegating, and lastly, imposter syndrome, which something is very real even for me and probably everybody.
Yep.
Can you talk to us a little bit about each of these and why they are important to recognize, and what our listeners can do to help themselves be more aware?
Yeah, these are things that I've been coaching women executives on for a couple of decades. And what's really nice is that the research on women's leadership that's been coming out over the last 5 to 7 years supports all of these things. So these are really important things for women to be aware of, and then to have tools in order to navigate that terrain. So I tell women that the imposter syndrome, when it shows up, that sense of self-doubt, that sense of, I don't know if I really belong here, that all that is it's your limbic brain that's gone into the fight or flight, and it's trying to protect you. So if you're taking risk, if you're stepping up in your career, if you're having courageous conversations, if you're really taking those steps, to expect that the imposter syndrome is probably going to show up at some point in time. And that instead of interpreting it as, oh, I've jumped out here too far, to remember and go, oh, yeah, Rita said that this would show up, and this is a sign that I'm actually moving forward in my career, or that I'm taking the next level risk in order to learn and grow and develop. And then to have tools in order to navigate that. So I have a self-talk tool that I use with all of my clients that can really help them have a process to be able to identify, what's the message that I'm telling myself that's creating this feeling of imposter. And so if you can write those down and actually look at them, the fact that you get them out of your head takes away some of their power. And then think about, what's a more powerful phrase that I can be using in my self-talk that actually will build my confidence. And then also to remember, you're in good company. I mean, Michelle Obama talks very openly about wrestling with the imposter syndrome, and women leaders on the world stage, they also wrestle with it. So, and I think it's not only for women. I think men are becoming more aware of this kind of can get to them as well. So being prepared for it, reading about it, and then having tools in which you can navigate your way through are some really good ways of dealing with it. And then you listed all the major ones there, Kristy. So
Well, they're all the ones I think, I've struggled with, and I'm sure that
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
people I know struggle with, so let's talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. So the work-life balance piece, I mean, no matter how helpful and cooperative our spouses are, we are usually the ones that are going, okay, is there enough milk in the refrigerator for breakfast tomorrow?
Oh my
Did I
god.
make the 6-month dental appointments for my kids? So what I like to say to folks is there is no real work-life balance. So to try and find some sort of external way of measuring that, don't do it because it doesn't exist.
I agree. I totally agree. I hate that question sometimes because I just feel like there's no way to really you just got to deal with it and have those conversations and just
Yep.
keep moving on.
And what I like to share with women is think about what makes you happy. And if you can identify that and then use that as your North Star, and then you can kind of figure out the steps in your work life balance around that, that can be a really useful way of thinking about it because it's not selfish to really get connected to what it is that makes you happy because your happiness is contagious. That's one of the things we've learned about the emotional intelligence research. So, the happier that you can be, the happier your family's going to be, the happier your team is going to be. So, there's real power in thinking about what is it that makes me happy and how do I make sure that I build some of that into my day on a regular basis. And then saying no. This is a super, super important one. There's a new book out called The No Club, written by the same professor that wrote the book years ago called Women Don't Ask. And saying no for us just seems like a tough thing. And the really important piece is you have to learn how to do it and do it on a regular basis. Because if you're saying yes to everything, you're living the lives other people want you to be living. You're not living your own.
Now, well, speaking of saying no, I've actually turned down, I want to say at least five engagements or asks for me to be at through the end of the year because I need a break, and it was really hard because I try to do so much, but
Yeah.
it is something that you have to figure out how to do, and
Yes.
it's okay.
And it's okay. It's totally okay. And if you can get one of the strategies that you can use is if someone asks you to do something, simply say to them, let me take a look at my calendar and see how it fits into my schedule. Then that gives you time to go back and think, does this really make sense for me to do this? And then you can graciously figure out a way that you can say no. And say no more often than you are comfortable saying no so that you can start to calibrate what it actually feels like that when you do say no, you're actually saying yes to you.
That's a good point. I started scheduling stuff out a few months out in particular because of that, but then also saying no as well. So I agree with you when you say, let me check my schedule. It does give you that time, and it's
Mhm.
important.
Yes, and it's a skill and it's a habit that needs practice and that we can build over time. And I would say ranks right up there as one of the most important skills to have, especially if you're a woman leader who wants to be moving up in your organization, because there will continue to be more demands on your time. And and this kind of gets into the delegating part too, because delegating is one of those really important skills that you want to build, especially if you want to spend more time contributing at a higher level and moving up. Because in order to do that, you have to have the time to sit back and reflect and think strategically. And the only way you're going to get that is to learn how to delegate things off your plate to those people around you. And so often when I'm talking with women about this, they're like, but I don't want to just dump work on my team. I know they're really busy. So we use an approach in terms of looking at what are all the things that you really should not be doing, and how can you look at some of those and say, you know what, this task would be a really good development opportunity for a person on my team. I'm going to talk with her about taking this on. And so that's a way to look at it. And then also a reminder that Harvard has been doing research for decades, of which they have said when leaders take time to think and reflect, it's the most important time that they can take, the most valuable time they can spend. And so you have to be doing some delegating in order to get that valuable time. And I was just working with a woman today who was talking about how she has delegated enough now that she can do a couple hours of strategic thinking time 2 or 3 times a week. And she said, it helps me stay out of overwhelm. It helps me stay connected to the big picture. It helps me to think through how I want to approach certain conversations and certain meetings. So she's discovering that it's making things much more efficient and effective.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. I know that's something that took me a while to do, and I've done a good bit of that, but there are times I'm like, okay, I know this person's really busy and I don't want to throw another task. And we just, and here at my company though, we just need some additional help.
Yeah.
That's also something to be aware of as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, and the more that you can do that strategic thinking time, then you can start to think about what are the actual priorities, what are the important but not urgent things I can be doing. And as changes are happening, you'll probably find there are things on your to-do list that really don't need to be done anymore. And for most of us, our managers come to us and say, can you add this to your to-do list? But they don't sit down and say, let's talk about the 5 things that need to go off your plate. And so you have to do that part on your own. And when you have that time to connect to the strategy and you have that time to think about what is important but not urgent, then you can start to say, oh, we don't need to do these things anymore because we've changed our processes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit, about the fact that you've worked with at least, I think, 10 women and 2 males within my company here, one being my COO. So can you talk a little bit about why it's so important for companies to invest in their people and work with a leadership coach like yourself?
Oh, yeah, I totally can. You've got great leaders in your organization, Kristy. I'm having so much fun working with them and just seeing them grow and develop and learn and build that confidence and take those next level of contribution steps. So the main reason is because leadership is changing so rapidly. Command and control, that used to be kind of the way to lead, and that authoritarian kind of an approach, which is exactly what made women look at that and say, I don't want to lead like that. But the favor that I think the pandemic has done for us is it's catapulted us into ways of leading that are much more collaborative, that are bring empathy to the table and are much more engaging, because now we're thinking about the full range of health of our employees, and we're really realizing we're humans first doing a job, not the job first, and then we just happen to be humans. And so, and I was just talking with a woman yesterday. She got a new boss, new hire to her organization, and he had been to a leadership training just recently. And he said to her, you know what, it wasn't even all that valuable because it really hasn't kept up. It's more of the old style of leading. And so she and I were talking about how great it is that she has a new boss that is ahead of the curve in terms of the new ways of leading. And back to coaching, remember I said back when I was first finishing my dissertation that coaching, the research on coaching, was showing how that was a process that really got people's behavior change to be happening. So that's why coaching is so invaluable, because leaders then are being able to learn and change and grow in real time, and they're being able to refine these new leadership skills and approaches, which are creating that sense of psychological safety so people can bring their ideas forward. All the organizations now are looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion for the sake of belonging. And so for leaders to really learn what are some of those approaches that create that sense of belonging in my team, not only for the sake of retaining employees because the great resignation is still going on, but also then to be able to bring all the different ideas to the table and to be able to facilitate and engage in conversations with teams that really help them to be able to contribute at that higher level and to learn and grow while they're doing their work.
Yeah, that's a really great way to say it. I mean, as a leader here, obviously we've engaged with you, and I can see the difference. And, I think every person that you have touched when they've struggled with certain things that I know that they've talked with you about. And I think sometimes, whether it's the CEO or whoever controls that budget and they see the cost of maybe going with a consultant or a coach like yourself, that's something I feel sometimes they think it's easy to just, we don't need that. But at the end of the day, sometimes they're going to get frustrated with an employee and maybe part ways with them instead of trying to work with them or just better them to get to the next level, which I feel is just so much, more valuable than the latter. So, I'm saying too that I think it's extremely important. I've worked with coaches in the past. I haven't worked with you as much, but I know with my team, like you've done a fantastic job and have definitely brought a new level of confidence and skill set to the group. So it's definitely important.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what makes this work so rewarding, is to see people really step up in that new way and with that next level. I think the other thing about coaching that makes it so valuable is that we're dealing with real-time situations. And if you think about school, you get a business case that you work on. And here, the real live what's happening is the business case. And that is what we use in order to build those new skills and help leaders become comfortable with those new ways of leading rather quickly, because they can start to see the results, and then we can fine tune and eke it and tweak it so it fits for them and their key strengths as well as their teams and the culture of their organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what's the best advice you ever got or advice you didn't take, and how did it change you?
Yeah, that would be that advice from my coach, Mark LeBlanc, that I didn't take for a handful of years, and then finally did take, and my business just catapulted once I did that. So that would be the one that really, really stands out. And I think the other one would be from a colleague of mine who said, really find your authentic voice and really coach in a way that is your unique style. It's okay to read what other people are doing and get some ideas, but at the end of the day, really leading and working from that sense of authenticity and groundedness within yourself, that's really where it's at. Because the more that I've paid attention to that, my stress level has gone down and my joy level has gone up.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. So,
Mhm.
if you could give one piece of advice to young women coming into the workforce, what would that be?
That would be that this is an amazing time to be a woman leader in an organization. So, number one. Number two, I would say take charge of your career. Know what it is, kind of where you want to end up. You might not have a specific sort of where you want to end up, but if you want to end up on an executive team, take charge of owning that, and then you can go backwards and kind of say, what might that path look like? It isn't carved in stone. It's going to change as you move throughout your career, but at least you have an idea of where it is that you want to go. I've had women who got to the executive ranks mid-career, and they've reached out to me and said, you know what? I took every job and every opportunity that was offered to me. I got tapped on the shoulder for the next role, and I always said yes. But now I ended up here at the head of marketing. And you know what? I don't really like marketing all that much. So now what am I going to do? So you don't want to end up like that. If you can have some sort of idea of where you want to go, where you're headed, kind of a direction, that's a great thing to do. And then look for mentors, read about women leaders that you admire. You can go to my website, www.wiseleader.net, sign up for my newsletter. It comes out a couple times a month. That's a great resource. There's also a resource page there that you can take a look at. So read the research on women's leadership so that you kind of know what some of the pitfalls are and what you can do differently so you don't fall into those pitfalls as much. I think Kristy and I had to kind of fall in and find our way out, but there's research now that really talks about some of those key, I wouldn't call them mistakes, but they're, if we don't have an awareness about it, it can slow down your career. So read about that so you're aware and so that you can start to have tools for navigating that career. And then remember, you're probably more capable than you realize that you are, and surround yourself with a group of supportive people, men and women, that can give you guidance along the way. And remember, we need your voice, so bring it. Speak
I
up.
I love it. I think you just really killed it. It was awesome content, great advice. I really enjoyed you sharing your knowledge with our audience. But we are at the end of our show, Rita. So thank you so much for sharing your personal and professional journey. For more information about Dr. Rita Webster and Wise Leader, please go to www.wiseleader.net or follow Rita on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening and stay tuned for more inspiring stories with the LLC podcast.